Live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Wolfram language design review, part of our incremental language development series. Okay, let's take a look at what we've got here. First, color from expression.
Yeah, so I think this came up in another meeting, I think related to the tabular project, talking about ways to create colors from arbitrary expressions. So Bob has this function that's in the function repository called hash hue, and there have been a number of similar functions created by people over the years uh, that all
Well, I mean,
take.
how does this relate to our whole color palettes project of trying to get, these families of colors that work and so on?
Yeah, I mean, so there's
I
a
think it's not
subsection
at
farther
all,
down.
I don't think it's at all related to that, right?
Well, I mean, the colors we want out of this need to be like that one there isn't a winning color.
Right. There's a section farther down using themes to try and curate this a little better. The main trade-off is the better coordinated the colors are, the less guarantee there is that we're going to have uniqueness for expert colors. That's
I understand,
basically
but I mean, the
the.
things we're doing for plot
Mhm.
curves and so on. You know, that's the kind of thing we should be doing here. This is the same problem as the I've got 10 curves on a plot.
Mhm.
What colors should they be? And we should solve it in the same way. Now, one other thing that is a
I
problem
mean,
that's not
there's an
in,
important distinction in that for the plot curves, you know that the inputs are just like an index, like just like the number of the curve. Whereas this one, the it's an arbitrary expression,
fair
kind of
point.
like a
Fair
hash where
point.
you
Right,
want,
right.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a fair point. I mean,
I mean, that certainly is one very common application of a color from expression function.
look,
But
I,
what hash
I'm
hue is a
yeah.
is a different application, possibly.
Okay, look, I think that one place where this is really relevant is uh um let's say uh come on. What the heck? Oh, this is the prototype build, so who
It's
knows what's going
prototypes.
on.
It's might be a little funky.
I'm going to show you something. I type percent. Look at that ugly thing where it
Ooh,
says temporal data.
yeah.
That's a bug that we should just fix. Okay, that's a mapping. But my
Mhm.
point about this in general is this kind of like iconic, let's say I make a plot, you know, um, this idea where we like an iconic hash of what's there. This is something we built. Remember, for the cloud, we tried to do this for notebooks. What's a
Mhm.
an icon that would represent a thing? I mean, to me, that is more useful probably than a hash color. I mean, a hash color is amusing, but I think that genuinely useful would be an iconic representation of the thing. Do you see what I'm saying?
Right. An important
I,
question is if
I,
if if the two things are just slightly different, do you want the
right.
icon to be slightly different or radically different? Right. For my use
Yeah,
case,
that's
when
a
I
that's a
created the
good question.
resource function, I wanted them to be radically different.
What was the use
Exactly.
case?
Right. So I wanted to look at a table of data, and if there was some value that wasn't identical, I wanted it to be glaringly different. And a lot of times it was numeric values. Right.
Well, how does that
And
work with machine epsilon and so on?
Well, I mean, a thousandth off, not a millionth or billionth off.
Well, which one? I mean,
Right, right. So certainly, what does hash do with machine epsilon? Yeah, if it has a different representation of memory, it's going to have a radically different value.
I mean, I don't know what hash does. That's a good question. Let's see. I mean, if I say 4 point plus dollar machine epsilon, and I say hash of that, Oh God, why am I getting an internal self-test error for undo atom? Who knows?
Okay.
Interesting.
Right, because I mean, right, you're adding it to too big a reel, right?
Oh, I see. I see. I see. If I say
You
one
need to
plus
add it.
machine
Yeah,
epsilon.
you need to add it to like one or something less than one.
Okay. That's pretty wild, actually, what it's doing there.
Interesting that 3 and 4 are the same
Well,
value.
I know, but look
Yeah.
at that. It's every pair are the same.
Oh, huh.
Possible issue for hash. Um, I'm more interested in the can we make. I understand your point that you just want to sort of color code. Wait a minute. These are all alternate versions of the same thing. Is that right?
They're different versions that sort of fiddle with those parameters of, how far apart you want things based on minor differences and
I understand.
how visually distinct they should be.
Right. And remember, Stephen, that one of the things where one of the ideas where we discuss this is things like you know, asymmetric key pair
Sure.
or
No,
you know,
that's been
or
successful,
even
but
I mean, imagine a rank 5 sparse array, right? You're not going to have an icon that represents the
I
content of
understand. But what
that,
we've done with the uh um what am I saying? What we've done with like the cryptography stuff is it's not just a color, right?
right?
Like we can tell those are different. And if I do it again, yeah, I mean, we can tell they're different. And that's certainly a way to do things. I mean, we could do it with pure color, we could do it with this type of thing. I mean, I feel like this isn't our highest priority thing to solve. I mean, we've got solutions in WFR. Why do we think there's a system function in this? It seems like there are just too many different cases. I would
It,
like a way to thumbnail an expression. That would be helpful to me, I think. Maybe not. I'm not sure. But what you're imagining is that it's a style. I mean, uh, really it would be something more like, hashed style of expa would display expa in a style that depends on the content of expa. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah, I'm thinking. I guess the way that this had been presented to me specifically with color was related to things like it highlighting differences in data frames or
I
something like that.
understand. I understand. But I
I
mean,
haven't thought about the
that's just
general
not a
problem, but yeah.
right. But that how are you going to highlight the difference? I mean, if you wrap hashed style around things,
Hmm.
then uh, you know, then that would do it for you. I mean, in other words, then you'd get everything that's here. You'd say for that column, I assume there's a way of specifying here how to format that column. There is, I think. And then you just say
Hmm.
hashed style is the way you're formatting it.
Yeah, like in I guess a slightly different version on the link where it says WFR. Bob has an example that uses, like crime data where it's basically so it's in the subsection header for Q hash. There's a link to WFR, and I think the first example has a uh,
Well, if you send me a link, I'll follow it. Why doesn't this allow me to copy the link? That seems to me
I
to
was
be a
having some
bug.
issue with copy and paste in
No, no,
like
no. Look. That's a
oh
bug. That should allow copy link.
hmm okay yeah. Can you note that, Carla?
Yeah, I'm taking.
You
What?
sorry, I was um you right clicked on a link and it didn't allow copy. Is that what happened?
Yeah.
Okay. That sounds vaguely familiar, but maybe not.
I just don't think this is a good idea. I mean, I just don't think this is a. I think it's amusing, but this is not a good. Not this is not a good idiom.
Yeah, or like the first example under scope was the one I was thinking of. Sorry, not the. So we have this version where we have a bunch of crimes, and you could apply instead of replacing it with the color, you could basically do this crime description of apply
I
hashed
see.
style, and then you get a visual. You may not be interested in exactly what the crime description is, but okay, these are grouped together.
I think this is a good WFR thing. I'm
Mhm.
okay from a standing start. I'm not seeing this as a convincing. Uh,
System function.
yeah,
Okay. Yeah, I think it had gotten kicked to us, and I wanted to look at it, but I'm
right. I
putting
mean,
it on the
it's
back
a
burner.
fine thing to talk about at some point,
Mhm.
but I don't think it's. I'm not seeing. I think we should talk about it in the context of iconizing expressions, which I think is worth having.
Mhm.
That's something we've wanted multiple times. Um,
So we had started to talk about this in a previous meeting, but we didn't really have much time to dive into it. Right now we have create UUID, which uses a UUID version 4 spec. There are 7 different UUID specs. I mean, there's technically an eighth one, but it's basically whatever schema you want. Um, and the main hitch would be, that we need to add in, we already have a prefix for the first argument. So we basically need to be adding in a second argument that would be a version, or we need an option that is the hashing method. There are
well, what's that last
advantages.
thing, base 36 string? That's the way it's being presented, right?
Yeah. So you might want it being presented as a base 36 string or a hex string, et cetera. That'd basically be a format as a secondary thing if we're doing extensions. So
It's quite useless. What's quite useless?
this was a comment from Ricardo when he was looking at, I mean, the
The
But I
existing
don't understand.
the
prefix
I mean,
the
argument
existing prefix. He didn't really like the first argument as it
because
why?
it's
exists.
trivial
Why?
to just add your own prefix with string join.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
Well, I see. It's just purely
Yeah, it's just
pasted
concatenating the
in.
strings.
That's crazy. What happens if I put in,
I think
ah,
it only works for strings, right?
so why don't we just have the version number there? Why don't we say create UUID 7 has V7, a V7 UUID?
Oh, we certainly could.
What's wrong with
The
that?
so the minor hitch, so under the closed subsection, there are all the different UUID forms or schemas kind of fall into different groups. 1 and 6 basically do the same sort of thing of concatenating a MAC address and date time hash. Their
Okay.
arguments are reversed basically, so the timestamp in the UUID 6 comes first so that it's
Okay,
easier
who
to.
cares? I mean, if the format
Mhm,
if create UUID of n
mhm,
creates a UUID of version n UUID, what's
mhm.
wrong with that?
There shouldn't be a problem with it except for I think it's version 4 and
What
5.
what's the problem?
The I mean there are a couple of UUID forms that require parameters.
What parameters?
So 3 and 5 they require a namespace and a name. So they're typically used for things like DNS, but they're basically deterministic hashes. Um, so if you want to create a
Why
UUID,
don't we put that in our hash function?
I think it would be fine to put them in hash. It would basically just mean that we would say create
Well,
UUID doesn't work for
look,
version 3 and 5.
if we say 3 arrow prefix, we could handle that, couldn't we?
We need two. You need a namespace and a name. So I mean, you could say 3 arrow list of whatever, or 3 arrow association namespace goes to blah.
Or it could be just list three,
Yeah.
parameters, which I think would be more standard.
Yeah, I just like having the naked 3 there.
Hmm.
Are we
And the
confident
name and
that
namespace aren't just concatenated in the UUID?
They're not.
Okay. Well, I would propose something like this.
are we
Okay.
confident that UID schemes will forever be known by integer version numbers?
Well, if they're
They
not,
have
then
been stable.
we could deprecate the design that says we could deprecate the function. We could dedocument this functionality, right? Giving us room in the future to, in n years.
To change it. Okay. Yeah, I hadn't thought about using integer indexes for it. I was thinking, if we're adding a second one, but since they're just currently indexed off of integer values, that makes sense.
And what about the format? So this solves the
Yeah, this solves the version problem. The second question is, do we want to have, you know, byte array encoded uh UUIDs or hex string UUIDs, or do we just say they're coming back as hex strings by default and you can encode them from there?
No, I think it'd be nice to have a second argument like we do in hash. I mean, hash has that second argument, right?
Third argument.
Third argument, yeah.
Right. I think we should support it. I don't see why we wouldn't.
Okay.
And in terms of supporting a UUID as a hash, I think we should do that. I think it'd be useful to people if they see it in the list of potential hashes. I think that would be a helpful thing.
Okay.
It would be called, UUID v3 or something like that.
Mhm.
Okay.
All right. Yeah, we will move forward with that. And if there's some issue, we'll circle back, but that makes sense
Okay.
to me. Right. Some time ago, we had talked about it would be nice to have a function to generate passwords in Wolfram language. I have a prototype version in the prototype builds that does kind of the basic case. There's a bunch of parameters. I've kind of based this on what generate symmetric key does, but there's a few questions. So, by default, there's certain assumptions. We're including letters, numbers, some common characters, which we'll probably need to think of a better name for. But there's a question
No
of,
way on that second thing. No way.
hmm,
Just generate a freaking password.
okay.
Like any other system does.
Hmm.
Um,
My main point with that is that as we get particularly into passphrase or this word-based password section, there are a lot of parameters you can potentially tweak, and it might be nice to have a dialogue
I don't
somewhere.
understand why
Maybe that's
generate password has a number here. I don't think that's useful. I wouldn't put that
yeah.
in there. I would.
Hmm.
I think we can use that argument for something much more important.
Okay.
Like, I mean, what I would do is to have generate password be um have its default That's not a great password. It's too short, isn't it?
It's defaulting to 8. We
Well,
can
but
certainly have it longer.
what do
Yeah.
most password managers now default to? Because they're longer than this, I'm pretty sure.
12 is pretty common. 8 is usually the minimum length that's allowed on various
Okay, so
forms.
let's not go for minimum because there's no
Mhm.
point. By the time it's a password like this,
Mhm.
nobody's trying to remember it. You see
Okay.
what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. We'll bump it up.
And make sure that we show the tooling to go, generate passwords, set system credentials to that, et cetera, et cetera, et
Hmm.
cetera.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I would say that what we want to do is to say something like this, and here we would say, words or whatever else.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, there's again a parallel with generate symmetric key kind of has the same notion of there are methods and then there are parameters that can be passed in for methods. So you might say words and it generates a word-based password. Uh,
Yeah,
I guess we could say random for the the machine version.
Characters.
Characters, yeah.
yeah, yeah. Characters and words seem
Mhm.
like obvious choices.
Mhm.
Um, and I mean, those should just be defaults, and we will change them over time or whatever else.
Yep. And I think having an association, words goes to association with whatever fine controls you want is
That's fine.
good.
Or a first argument that's just the association
Yep. Yep.
that has all those things. Password, type, arrow, words.
Hmm.
And I don't know what the password length means when it's dealing with words.
So if you look on the word based section down there, generally a passphrase or password based system will have a number of words that you're using. Like the implementation here is kind of basic, but this version generates 3-word passwords. It includes some extra things like separators and padding. And there's a bunch of different standards, like Apple has their own standard that they recommend for Apple IDs. There are algorithms for generating web 16 or 32-bit that are word based but guaranteed to be 16 characters or
I don't
32.
understand why this junk is in here. I mean, I thought these
It's
word-based
basically to
ones are just like word, word, word with dashes between or something.
that's one
Yeah, but
feature.
then the website complains that you need special characters or that you
Or
can't use a
numbers.
space.
Hmm. It also increases entropy. It's still human memorable generally.
No, it's
There's
not. These are not. That one is
it,
not. I'm sorry, that one is not. It's just not. I mean, okay, look, if we can name these different password schemes,
mhm.
then uh if we can
Then we
come
could
up
have them
with
be
good names, then
presets.
we can have a bunch of presets. I
Mhm.
mean, maybe there are things like Apple ID that we just use as names. I mean, if there's a standard for that, see what I'm saying?
Mhm. Yeah.
WPA, if there's a standard for it, why don't we just use that as a name? And you're generating a password suitable for that type of thing.
Hmm. Yeah, we can certainly do that.
I'm sorry, I missed something. What are we claiming that Apple ID represents?
That
There's
there's
a
a
there's a recommended password schema that uses passphrases that Apple has on their Apple ID setup
right. So I mean, somebody
tutorial.
needs to go research this a bit
Hmm.
and come back with. I think we just have to come up with names
Hmm.
for and I don't know for non-US keyboards, for example, there are all kinds of additional things, right?
Yep, there's extra characters, so there's different
I know, but
dictionaries
I
to
mean,
use,
right,
and
and it's like language. We probably just want a language option.
yep, there's in keyboard layout, Alt GR can create problems with some special characters and passwords.
Yeah,
So yeah, I think the idea I generally have is that, we have flexibility with a lot of parameters, and I like the idea of having presets that just say,
right. I
okay,
think we should have
3-word
presets that are
passphrase,
suitable
done.
for, where I mean, conceivably we could have a default way to do it, but I don't think it's necessary. I think people can just remember, I'm going to use generate password with words, and that's how I usually do it.
Mhm.
Okay, but I also want to make sure that we have a workflow where those passwords can get stored in the keychain system, credential thing and so
Yep.
on.
Yeah.
And also, if you are generating a password for a cloud object, for example, how that all works. Make sense?
Yep. Yeah, those would be
And we might want
obvious.
some WFRs that basically will generate it and send email about it and so on.
The dialogue you suggested would be a good function repository thing too.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good point.
All right. What's this here?
So
Flip
this is
function, like
yeah. So
as
this
opposed to a
is
flip phone.
yeah. So this is a variation on reverse applied that just switches the order of two arguments. So something
What?
I regularly run into with like
Well,
date conversions is that some date functions expect the first date to be earlier than the second date, and some data sources will return things in the reversed order. And I can reverse them, but if I want to get date difference in years, then I need to reconstruct and map things
so
across.
you want flip applied, which flips the first two arguments. Is that correct?
Right. Or we could look at some argument structure to do it in reverse applied. My only qualm there is that too far of a departure from reverse applied as a function name?
Reverses the first n arguments. Why the hell isn't this reverse applied f comma 2?
Because we can also specify which arguments to flip. This is reverse applied of 2, f comma 2, but we can also say I want to switch the first and last argument, which would be something we could extend in reverse applied.
Well, it would be more like permute applied.
Mm.
I don't think it's flip applied unless it's just 2.
Yeah, so I guess the question is if we want to extend the second argument of reverse applied.
I wouldn't.
Does an operator applied do this with the two argument form?
Not quite. I mean,
So, I mean, this would be reorder applied where I could say 312 here, for example.
mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know how useful this would be, but it's somewhat useful actually,
It comes up
because otherwise
surprisingly
you have to
often.
do a bunch of applied and lists and all this kind of stuff. I'd be tentatively in favor of reorder applied. Can we think it through?
Is that a permutation list or is that a cycles? In which case, maybe it should be cycles.
I was thinking of it as a permutation. The third.
Should it be the
but I meant,
same spec as operator applied?
what is
The
operator?
example you have on your screen right now would work with operator applied. That's exactly what it does.
The thing with operator applied is it accepts the arguments in a curried form, and this is not doing that. This reorder applied. But the
What do you mean
third
accept?
usage
So
line.
does it only do curried form
No.
for operator applied?
I think operator applied allows it to be curried, however.
What do you know? It already works.
Mm-hmm.
So what is that to do?
Okay.
Yeah. So why do we need a new
Yes.
function?
So if you add a D to the sub values there, it becomes interesting.
Mm.
Right. Operator applied doesn't care how you curry the arguments.
Subtle. All right. I mean, so reorder applied could be the same as operator applied, but not do this, but only reorder the ones that it's asked to reorder and leave the other ones in their sequence, basically.
Yeah.
Or
That seems somewhat useful. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
I was going to suggest, well, maybe we add support in operator applied for cycles and then you only specify the things you want to move, and in that form it knows.
I think it's obscure. I think knowing that operator applied, because people are going to think of operator applied in a different way. I certainly do.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I'd honestly forgotten about this usage form for operator applied also.
All right. So tentatively, I think reorder applied makes sense. The cycles thing, I think, is very weird.
Why?
I mean, maybe we should, well, we could support it, but
I mean, if you have 5 arguments and you want to just flip 2 of them, cycles of 2, 4 is much easier than
fair point. Fair point. Fair point.
Yeah.
Fair point. It's reasonable. So reorder applied.
And we could also
sequentiation.
support two-way rule for the just flip 2 case.
Oh, I like that's a good idea.
Yeah. Would it be safe to extend that into operator applied also?
I would think so. I'm not sure. I'm not sure because I don't know what's happening with the subvaluing.
Yeah, that's a question to look into at least.
All right, let's have a quick look at the last thing on the agenda here. Trim.
Yeah, so this is actually one of our pretty old WFR functions. I think Tally originally wrote it. It's basically a way of specifying a rectangular form for ragged arrays. So I have a ragged array. I want to operate on a map thread, something else. It doesn't work because it's not consistent dimensions.
Well, I mean,
trim
basically,
down
but
to,
you might want to put zeros in it or something like this. I mean, you want to
right, that
puff
would
it
be
out
padding. You might
Right.
want to pad it or you might want to trim it. And this is kind of there's a trim left and a trim right version. I think it's maybe a little weird to.
Well, I don't think that makes sense because you can have an 8-dimensional array, and I don't know what the
Right.
heck left and right are then. Look, I think this general question, I mean, there are a bunch of image processing functions that have padding options and so on. I mean, I would think that something like or array, I mean, because it is an array, so you can't say it's you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Rectangularize an array, and the default would be chop off all the proboscis, chop off all the tentacles, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Basically have the shortest row dictate where you chop things off.
Right. And failing that, I think it would be dims here.
Mm-hmm.
What dimensions do you want? And now you've got a whole kinds of stuff about is at the beginning, is at the end. I mean, here again, there are all kinds of issues about do you chop the beginnings of rows, the ends of the rows, etc. Now here also, there's now what we have an analogy here, like with center array, for example. I think we have AB here, comma 10, right, comma X would be that.
Mm.
Or should this be rectangularize array? I think rectangularize is okay. It's pretty obvious what it means. And then, so that's the padding argument, if you need a padding argument. I think by default, it's just, continue with that index, if you understand what I'm saying. That's the either cut down, have that index. Dims it has very obvious functionality, right? It's like have that index. You've already got elements 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but you only need 4 of them. Cut off the 5th one. You are given elements 1, 2, 3, 4. You're going to add a 5th one. Okay, add the 5th one at the end. In other words, you've got existing part numbers. Use them.
Yep.
Now, okay, so the rule is any part number that's already there stays the same in the rectangularized form. Does that make sense? And then I think it's completely well defined what this should do, and seems useful to me.
Yeah. Then the only ambiguity is whether we pad and trim from the right hand side, the end of the row or beginning, which we can parameterize if we need
No,
to.
I don't
It
understand.
has to be from the end if the
Right.
part numbers don't change.
Oh yeah, if the part numbers don't change, that's right.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it's the only
Okay.
consistent thing to do is don't change the part numbers.
Okay. Yeah.
I think anything else is going to get very funky with different left, right, whatever.
Right. I guess you could always reverse it if you want to.
At that level, if you wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. If you really, really wanted to.
Okay.
But I think I agree that this is useful. This is part of sort of repairing data type thing.
Mm-hmm.
It is unclear to me what the default when you don't put, I mean, a lot of other things default to 0 when you don't put, I think that's what we should do. Center array defaults to 0. I think this should default to 0 as well.
Okay. It'll just pad out to 0.
Yep.
Pad out with zeros.
Yep.
Okay.
All right.
But it won't trim already existing bleeding zeros.
No.
No.
Because it's got to keep the part numbers the same.
I think it really should keep the part numbers the same. I think this is useful, but we just don't want to be messing with, I mean, just to be clear, this is, I mean, its relationship to pad right. If I say A, B, C like this, and I say pad right, that's what it does.
Yep.
I mean, it's not clear why rectangularize is any different from pad right.
It shrinks rather than grows.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, we have the ability to shrink it.
Right, but rectangularize is a general version of this. Pad right, if I said pad right this, comma, 4, 4, right, it does that, which is what I'm suggesting here as well.
Yep. But if you said...
If you did 1, 1, it would trim already though, right?
I think it would trim.
Yeah.
So is rectangularize just a different default of pad right?
In which case, why is it a different default?
Because this defaults to padding.
Rectangularize has to compute the minimal dimension for each level.
And so what is pad right doing in that case?
The maximal dimension.
Well, maybe it should be called
you could
trim.
just have a magic token to the second argument to pad right.
Yeah, but nobody's ever going to find it.
Yeah.
So okay. Oh, so rectangular. If we did rectangularize on that input, we would end up with the matrix containing A.
No, I think we'd end up with that. That's rectangular.
I see.
Could just be the row AB though. It's ambiguous, right? It's always a column first thing.
That's an interesting question. And that's another issue. Yeah, I think you're trying to preserve. What are you trying to do? I mean, I think this case is pretty ambiguous because the number of elements is the same both ways. I think it's like I'm thinking of it as some kind of not convex hull, but imagine that you have these points in. Yeah, how do you do this? Do you understand what I'm saying? I mean, can somebody think about this? I agree that there's
right. So I don't. I mean, right. saying it's column first, I think, is not useful. If we say it's innermost level, right, we minimize the innermost level.
Right. Just the name rectangularized puts me into linear algebra mode. And I want to think about it that way.
Well, what would it mean in linear algebra terms?
I don't think it would mean anything, right?
Okay, fine. I need to get going. Anything else we should cover here? I mean, I think that this is a function, I think rectangularize and or trim, but I think rectangularize is a better term because I think it makes it clearer that you can go both ways.
Yeah, we'll prototype it and see where we end up on
Fine.
the. Yep.
Sounds good. Okay. Thanks a lot, guys.
All right. Thanks all.
Bye.
See you.
Bye.
See you later.